Hey everyone, today we're talking about creating accessible content for your users and focusing on the principles of accessibility, also known as pour. So grab a seat and pour yourself something to drink. Get it? Pour? Oh, okay, start the music. So creating accessible content really means putting people at the center of your content. First of all, accessible content is going to attract more users. The more accessible your content is, the larger audience you're going to engage. It's going to improve the user experience of everyone that's engaging with your content. Everyone has a right and a need to access content on the web, so making your content accessible is going to improve their user experience. So the web shouldn't be a barrier for anyone. Your community shouldn't have to change to access the content. The content should be able to be accessible to everyone. And when we talk about creating content, we're going to focus on the 4 principles of accessibility. And we often hear the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R. So your content has to be easily perceived, it has to be operable, it has to be understandable, and it has to be robust. So you don't want to get bogged down in the technical aspects of all of these, but rather develop a deeper understanding of what each of these principles hopes to accomplish. So let's start with perceivable. And this is the idea that the information and the components of your site have to be presented in a way that users can identify using their senses. And mainly on the web, that has to deal with sight and sound. If you think about it, communication does rely on the senses, and if your users can't perceive that content, that's going to be an issue. So on the web, we're mainly focused with sight and sound. So users with full vision, they can read text, they can view images, and they can understand the visual cues and the design elements of your school website. And that's so powerful when it comes to design and content. But for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, those visuals become even more important. So think of everything we access through audio cues, right? The Zoom meetings, the video, podcasts, live streaming. All of that content should be accompanied by alt text so folks who are deaf or hard of hearing can access that content as well. We also want to think about content versus style versus presentation. And it's important to differentiate all of them because depending on how the content is presented, it can be perceived in different ways. So your message should really be clear even if all the styles weren't available to the user. So that includes background colors, graphics, and sounds not interfering with the content. So for example, if your main content is audio and you have background noise interfering with a voiceover, that's going to be an issue. So you want to provide alt text for any non-text content so that can be changed into other forms as people need it. So think about large print, speech, symbols, or even different languages. Create content that could be presented in simpler ways, right? So for example, a simpler layout without losing any of that information or meaning. So make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating that foreground from the background or excessive noise if there's voiceovers. Operable basically is how your audience inputs information into your school's website. So that means users have to be able to control the buttons, the navigation, and the interactive elements also. And this is where a lot of that assistive technology comes into play, like the keyboard or touchscreens or voice recognition software. So no matter the physical ability of your users, they have to be able to engage and navigate your content. So consider a student who's in a cast and can't operate a mouse. They need to be able to access your site through the keyboard. And consider people with visual impairments, right? Just because they're able to use a mouse and navigate the site, you have to make sure a lot of your content is actually visible and clickable. The keyboard is going to be much easier to operate. So keyboard accessibility is one of the most important principles of web accessibility because it cuts across so many disability types and technologies. Gives users enough time to actually read and access the content. You want to avoid using content that could possibly cause seizures like rapidly flashing screens or quick cuts in your videos. So provide ways to help users navigate the site and determine if they're on the correct page, like providing accurate headings, page titles, and descriptive calls to action. Understandable. This is a pretty straightforward one. It's basically that your school's content should be written as clearly and as simply as possible. Users need to be able to understand the information that's being presented. So avoid using unnecessarily complicated words and shy away from using too much jargon on your site. So consistency is a big part of this, right? You want to present navigation on your site in a way that's predictable. You don't want to be changing navigation. You want to create that consistency from page to page. Create summaries or abstracts for longer pieces of text. Again, a lot of us don't read, we just scan. If you have a lot of text on the page, using bullet points or summaries below can help make that information more more understandable. The controls on your form should be pretty straightforward. If folks are submitting information, you want them to know what's going to happen next or what they're doing when they hit that submit button. Robust, so this means that your content in your site has to be accessible through a wide variety of browsers and assistive technologies. It seems like there's an update to operating system and browsers every couple of days, but it's always best practice to make sure that your site is looking great across a variety of browsers. You never want to have a situation where you're telling folks to use Firefox or use Explorer or Chrome. So that's basically it. When you're creating content for your website, make sure that it's perceivable, which means users can perceive it through a variety of different senses. Operable, which means that users can control the buttons and the navigation and other interactive elements. Understandable, we want to make sure that we're writing as clearly and as simply as possible. And robust, the content has to be compatible with a variety of different browsers and operating systems.